Welcome to episode 52 of the G2 on 5G. It's the latest inside scoop on everything 5G. We cover 6 topics in about 15 minutes, and it's brought to you by More Insights and Strategy. I'm Will Townsend, dialing in from Islamorada, Florida, and joining me again this week is fellow analyst Anshel Sag. Let's get started with my first topic. This week, Telefonica and Microsoft announced a 5G Edge tie-up. Nothing, from my perspective, spectacular news-wise here. Lots of operators are partnering with public cloud providers, for edge enablement. We've talked about Amazon Web Services and Verizon quite extensively. So, is Telefonica late to the party with Azure? Not necessarily. We've also talked about the fact that, given some of the hurdles that EU countries have to go through, with spectrum licensing and that sort of thing, in all these individual countries, it's a lot more complicated. So I think it's good news. I mean, they spoke to some of the same capabilities that we've heard from Verizon and other operators, such as, enabling widespread digital transformation, Industry 4.0, and the automation of manufacturing. So I think it's a natural progression. Certainly from my perspective, I believe AWS is still in the pole position, but Azure has really closed the gap. And I've talked about Azure and their acquisitions that have really helped catapult them into a solid number 2 position. I do expect that we're going to start hearing a lot more from GCP, from Google Cloud, because they have been somewhat late to the party. But do you have anything to add here, Anshel?
Yeah, I would say that I wouldn't say that they're necessarily late to the party. I would say that they are later to the party
Sure.
because I don't think it's necessarily crucial or critical right now to have this capability. But I do think the earlier you have it out there and you have it deployed and you start using it, the longer time you have to figure out the kinks and refine the experience and make it a seamless integration with 5G Edge and applications and all that kind of stuff. So,
Yeah.
like you said, Microsoft is still trailing Amazon Web Services, but I do think it's a big one because Telefonica is a very big carrier.
Certainly.
They have operations globally, so they're like a Vodafone where they influence a lot of different countries simultaneously.
Yeah, and this is a great win for Microsoft, no doubt. I can say they're fashionably late to the party. And I don't know the specifics behind whether Telefonica put out a tender, but certainly my assumption would be they probably did. And this was a very strategic opportunity for Microsoft Azure to win. And so, I believe there are probably other things behind the scenes here. There might be some additional capabilities that Microsoft can bring to bear with respect to helping Telefonica, monetize new 5G enterprise services just beyond edge enablement. So, there are probably some other factors behind the scenes, but this is certainly a great win for Microsoft. But with that, let's move to your first topic this week, and you want to talk about a GSA 5G report.
Yeah, so once again, GSA does these reports monthly. So I actually like to follow them because they are very good at gathering data that's actually real data that's constantly being tracked. So they said that they found that there are now 756 announced 5G devices, which is 7.5% over last month and 28.6% higher than the beginning of the year. And then there's 468 commercially available devices in the 5G devices, which is 28% higher than the beginning of the year as well. So announced devices and launch devices are both basically moving at the same rate. And it's 61.9% of announced devices are already commercially available. So it's not like there's a vast majority of announced devices and none of them are launching compared to where we were maybe a year or two ago when we had a ton of announced devices, but they were starting to just trickle out little by little. So they said there's 22 different form factors and there's 124 different vendors who have announced available or forthcoming 5G devices, which is a lot. And that there's just 135 FWA fixed wireless CPE devices, both indoor and outdoor, which 54 of those are commercially available. So there's a rich and broad ecosystem out there. There's 387 phones, and 330 of those have launched. So it's crazy. There's a lot of devices out there, and 5G has become, the de facto standard for new devices now. I would say that it's probably the majority now. But obviously those numbers haven't come out yet. But the real takeaway is that 5G is the dominant technology for wireless now. And I don't see that changing anytime soon. If anything, 4G will pretty much become a budget technology probably for the next couple of years until it's fully phased out.
So just point of clarification. So on the 468 commercial devices, so that's commercially available or commercial as in enterprise type devices?
Those are commercially available devices.
Got it.
So
Got it.
That's total, including CPEs and phones and laptops and all that kind of stuff.
Okay.
330 of those are phones.
Got it. Cool. Yeah, I just wanted to get a little clarity from you on that. And
I throw a lot of numbers out.
Yeah, it gets me thinking, if I think about commercial purpose devices, it gets me thinking about, some of these foldable designs that we've seen from Huawei and Samsung and even Motorola with that foldable Razr design that they announced. And I've talked about this on prior podcasts. I think those foldables are interesting for commercial use when you think about field service and you think about, equipping lightweight, larger form factor, devices that can be folded and more compact and use things like OLED screens that are more flexible and that sort of thing. So I think, we've seen some initial foldable devices, but I really believe once, we see 5G fully deployed around the globe, when all operators get to stand alone and we start really seeing some, very, very innovative enterprise type services, especially around field service. I think we're going to start seeing, even a new class of, device like a phablet, that roll out. Yeah.
I think there will be more to that coming very soon, in a very big way. Unfortunately, it was a NDA briefing, so I can't say who or when, but it's coming soon. So you hit a thread there and you didn't realize it, but there's something coming very soon. So I'm very excited for that. And we'll definitely talk about it on the podcast when it's public. But let's move on to your next topic.
Yeah, perfect. So I want to talk about my second topic this week. And there was news this week that a new coalition was formed. And the impetus for this coalition is to lobby the FCC to release 12 gigahertz spectrum, which has been reserved up until now for low Earth orbit satellite providers like Starlink that we've discussed, SpaceX on prior podcasts, as well as OneWeb and others. They're wanting the FCC to free some of that up and allow that to be, some of it to be repurposed for terrestrial applications. From my perspective, because I believe satellite's going to play such an important part of bridging the digital divide globally, and certainly I've talked about that. I've talked about how I believe fixed wireless access is going to do it as well. From my perspective on first blush, my initial reaction would be keep it, FCC, if I were making the decision, let's keep it fenced off for these satellite, internet providers initially. Allow them to build out their networks, because as you and I have talked about on prior podcasts as well, they're going to be launching a lot of these lower orbit, satellites. And again, I just think let's allow the LEO providers, access to that spectrum. And once those networks are fully deployed, then consider doing that. But this is a coalition that's made up of about 20 different, companies that are lobbying for interest. And I'm certain that there are a lot of operators involved in that coalition as well. But do you have any additional perspective to share?
Yeah, I think 12 gigahertz is an interesting band because it doesn't necessarily have the propagation characteristics of millimeter wave,
Mm-hmm.
nor does it really behave like a low band.
Yeah.
But I'm sure there's tons of bandwidth available there.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it would operate something like a 6 gigahertz band would, in terms of coverage. It's very interesting. I'm not really sure how well it will fit into terrestrial use
Mm-hmm.
cases, but I'm sure there are some applications where it might work
Yeah.
well. And I think just having the availability of that spectrum in their quiver, and maybe potentially not paying too much for it like they had to with C-band, might be a good way to approach it, and maybe not be as aggressive with bidding up the price.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Yeah, that's wishful thinking, I think. I would, the FCC, I think, really needs to start balancing out, future auctions with respect to, raising funding. But cool. Well, let's move to your second topic this week. And I was reading about this as well, on, sort of Apple's update on where they're at with their 5G modem development. But you wanted to share some additional perspective there.
Yeah, so there was a report that came out that said, Apple is coming with a 5G modem in about 2 years. So
Mm-hmm.
the time horizon was 2023. I've been covering this since before it existed. Um, I was one of the few people out there that kind of anticipated that Apple would go out and buy Intel's modem division.
Mm-hmm.
And I even warned Intel about it. Uh, and and the reality is that Apple will always try to integrate as much of its bill of materials as it can. And that naturally has moved on to the modem. The last attempt they had was with the GPU, and they nearly destroyed Imagination Technologies by doing so.
Mm-hmm.
And then eventually, kissed and made up and deleted everything as if nothing ever happened. So they like to integrate their chips as tightly as possible, and it's a natural progression for them to integrate the modem. It was a matter of when, not if. And now my expectation is that Apple was going to probably do it in 2024, not 2023, because I kind of gave them a 3 to 5 year horizon from when they acquired Intel's modem division in 2019 for $1 billion, which is a very deep discount.
Yeah.
And the way I see it is they're going to want to have their modems in everything that they make, with maybe the exception of the Mac Pro desktop and maybe the iMac, right? But otherwise, laptops, tablets, phones, watches, AR, VR headsets, everything's going to want to have 5G integrated for the sake of cost, power, and being able to add more services to devices that may not have them today. So, connecting iCloud more seamlessly across devices using cellular as that core backhaul. And also, I think that if you look at it, Apple doesn't necessarily have to deliver the fastest 5G modem. They just have to deliver one that meets their needs and expectations for bandwidth, for latency, for power, right? And if they hit on those, I think realistically they will very likely come close to the competition. That said, I don't necessarily think the Qualcomms of the world are going to stay still and let Apple catch up to them, because realistically, in 2 to 3 years, Qualcomm's going to be much further along than they are today. So whether or not Apple's efforts will work out as they're hoping, we'll see. But the reality is that I think the market will continue to move forward and advance. And I do think that Apple will absolutely support millimeter wave. And they'll very, very likely extend their license agreement that they have with Qualcomm, which is currently I think it's a 4 + 2 years. So they've got a 4 year agreement, which means that agreement's up in 2023. And then they've got another 2 years to extend that licensing agreement, which they very likely will do, because I have a strong feeling that they'll probably have to share some patents with Qualcomm and others.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. Like you educated me. Like I didn't realize that they'd only paid $1 billion for that business unit from Intel. Do you have any idea of like what their development costs, their R&D costs are to leverage that and and build out this capability?
So there is no public information on this, but I can tell you that based on what Qualcomm spends
Yeah.
and what Intel spent, it's probably in the range of 1 to 2 billion a year because they
Okay.
inherited like about 1,000 engineers,
Right.
and they're hiring extremely aggressively here in San Diego, trying to
Okay.
poach as many Qualcomm, MediaTek, Huawei, Intel that maybe didn't come with the deal, all
Right.
these different engineers that live here in San Diego, which is basically like the modem mecca. I call it the modem mecca,
Yeah.
but it's basically like all the engineering talent for modems is basically here. That
Yeah.
said, they did also announce that 5G silicon facility in Germany. If you remember, we covered that in the podcast.
We
And they
did.
were going to spend like 1 billion or 2 just there alone to build
Right.
that facility. So
Yeah.
I think they're spending well into the billions. But when you look at Apple's revenue and their profit,
Yeah.
these are small time investments for much larger scale business.
Yeah, yeah. And you make a very good point. I mean, it's very strategic because everything's going to be connected, other than a desktop, like you mentioned as well. So it may seem like a lot of money on the surface, but when you look at Apple's market cap and their average R&D budget, it's really it's a slam dunk investment for them. So we'll stay on top of this, and as news develops, we'll update our audience. So let me move to my third and final topic this week, and I want to talk about a startup called Airwave. And this is really interesting. This was a light reading article that Sue Merrick posted. And what this is the founder is a former executive from AT&T and ZTE. And what Airwave is seeking to solve is to create a marketplace where they can put owners and operators together for small cell densification. You and I have talked about this on prior podcasts. It's very difficult to get densification authority from local municipalities. And this has happened in Austin, Texas, my hometown as well. And it's a very arduous process. And so what Airwave intends to do is to put together, think of it as sort of like the Airbnb for small cell deployment. They are going to basically put owners of buildings and towers and those sorts of things that are willing to host a small cell together with operators and try to streamline that process. And I think it's super innovative. What do you think?
My gut reaction is the matchmaker, make me a match. Because I think you're right. There is definitely a gap between what operators need in terms of siting
Yeah.
and who's willing to cooperate with them, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's also gives building owners another opportunity to find an operator who needs their building in a way that doesn't necessarily take up much of their time.
Yeah.
And at the same time comes in as a fairly good opportunity to make money. And that this system is great because, or in theory at least, because I think it brings like-minded parties together. And like you said, potentially could streamline the process in a way that could benefit the industry because it matches together the two different parties that are needed to make a small cell possible. That said, we also need the municipalities to also be on board.
Right. Yeah, they have to all be part of the discussion and mapping everything out. And as we've talked about on prior podcasts, densification is critically important with respect, of deploying 5G, especially when you look at millimeter wave in urban areas because of the short propagation characteristics of the spectrum. So I think, anything that helps streamline that process. We have just now in Austin, Texas, seen some significant densification, but it was, I can tell you, I won't name the operator, but that operator shared with me personally that it was a very, very difficult process in my part of the world. So we'll keep tabs on this and report back as things develop. But let's move to your third and final topic this week. And you want to talk about the FCC and their call for input with respect to the current silicon shortage.
Yeah, so the FCC put out a public notice on Tuesday asking the industry to comment on how the chip shortage, the global chip shortage, is affecting them. Because we've seen it happen in the auto industry, and it's caused, auto manufacturers have to cut back their manufacturing and potentially, stop some factories. And basically, if you think about it, right, silicon is what drives 5G, Wi-Fi, satellites. All of the telecommunications we have nowadays are driven by chips. So the FCC wants to have a better understanding by inviting the industry to comment on how it's affecting them. And we might learn some interesting things from this because it's a public process.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting thing because I think it is affecting the industry, and we don't really have a full understanding unless earnings comes around, and we have different operators saying that this might be affecting their ability to roll out C-band. So that's kind of the reason why I brought this up as a 5G topic, because it affects 5G chipsets and phones, but as well as infrastructure and the rolling out of the network. So I think we're seeing some potential implications, but I think the FCC trying to gather that is valuable because they're going to be the ones who probably inform, the Biden administration on how to spend that $50 billion in improving, semiconductor manufacturing incentives. And I think even AT&T's CEO John Stankey expressed some concern about supply chain and how it was affecting their potential access to C-band equipment.
Yeah, I mean, no doubt. I mean, it's, we're seeing the effects with, with automotive, right? There are certain, automobile manufacturers that can't supply vehicles. Like I saw an image, I forget where it was at, but there were literally hundreds, if not thousands, of Ford F-150 trucks that were awaiting, final silicon. Because if you think about it, most cars have on average 200 to 300, systems on a chip, right? And so I think that's at least making the public aware of like the real ramifications of the silicon shortage with respect to automobiles, which affects everyone. But you make a very good point. Silicon is at the heart of 5G, and if we think about Qualcomm for a moment, so many of the Snapdragon system on a chip solutions are being integrated into things like cameras and and IoT devices and that sort of thing, and this could really impact the deployment of devices long term. So, and to your point, part of the Biden administration's infrastructure package is they want to spur development of semiconductor capability so that we're not in this situation again. But it's just it's been a comical year and a half as as we kind of exit COVID, and now we're in 2021, and we're seeing these other issues with supply chain pop up. But again, Anshel, another great podcast this week. Why don't you take us home?
Absolutely. We hope our viewers and listeners found this week's topics interesting. If anyone out there would like to provide us with a specific 5G topic to cover in a future podcast, please reach out to us on social media. Will is at Whaletown Tech, and I'm at Anshel Sag. We hope you have a great weekend, and please tune again next week.